brand name couch. And why not go with a fancy brand? Is it fancy? It's evidently they make like iconic couches which have been celebrated by men with beards and too much money. But anyways, we're going to be making the Zanotti William couch, which besides looking nice, because it is a designer couch, they also give you the blueprints, high-res reference photos, etc. So they give it to you in weird files, so I've converted them all into something that you can download. So download the zip file in the description, and that'll give you everything. So now in Blender, we're going to delete everything and we're going to load in the blueprint so we can start modeling the couch. So I'm going to hit Shift A, then go Image, Reference, and then find wherever it is you've unzipped your zip file, the PNG blueprint, and load that in. And you can see we've now got an image which is rotated arbitrarily. Evidently it's to match whatever angle you were at previously, but we can clear that by hitting Alt R. Now let's get a good look at this thing. You can see it looks like there's three of them, but it's just the different angles. So we're looking top down now. So we might as well start with this one right here. So we want to model the basic shape of the couch. So we're going to add in a cube. The second one's always better than the first one. So with the image here selected, it's a little too bright, right? It's a little too white, and that is definitely not cool. So I'm going to go now into wireframe with my cube here. And yeah, we can start scaling this to match it. Now you will see in our blueprint, besides giving you the dimensions, it's also giving you the actual measurements, which is very handy. So at least one of the measurements, but that's all you need. So with my cube here selected, if I hit N for Nelly, and then underneath item, you'll find a dimension there, right? So we just want it to match that. So 224 centimeters. This is basic. It's not the most thrilling stuff, but but we got to do it. So now that I've got that, I know that this is the correct width of the couch, and it means that my reference image needs to be scaled down. So scale up the blueprint now, scale it down, whatever, until it matches. It's a little bit fiddly, but at least you only have to do it once, hopefully, if you do it properly the first time. There we go. Okay, cool. So, well done. We've got one box checked. So looking top down, we've got the dimensions right. Let's scale this back a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Now this is actually going to be the bottom slab of our couch there, right? So if we look front on, we now need to duplicate our reference and then rotate it along the x-axis to 90 degrees, holding down Control, right? You can see top left-hand corner, it's snapping it to 5-degree increments, very handy. If you haven't watched my chair tutorial, by the way, it goes over a lot of this stuff that we're doing now, which is kind of boring, but, you know, it's handy if you want to learn how to model anything in the future, which you might want to do. So with the cube here selected now, I can scale this down. And look at that. We have the bottom slab of the couch. Lovely. Now we also have another view of our reference, of our blueprint, which is the side view. So duplicate it one last time, rotate this 90 degrees, and yeah, there we go. That's where it's supposed to go. And then I just position this like so, and there we have it. Ha, thrilling. Now we can add a bevel and everything. We'll probably do that later. For now, we just want to finish modeling the rest of the couch. So it's got this kind of like flat board. It's probably easier to look at from here. It's got like a flat board thing that sort of stretches around it. So might as well model that next. So duplicate this, scale this in, and this is going to be exactly that. So it starts about here. This is, you know, unfortunately, what you have to start the tutorial series with, which is the most boring part. I promise you the rest is more fun. I was thinking of just like speeding this part up, but then I thought, you know, some of you guys always want the slow version. So I figured, you know, if you know how to model a couch, you can just do it and you can skip ahead. But anyways, so I've only modeled half of it because I want to use the mirror modifier, which is just going to be handy. And now that I've got that, I can select my mirror object and make it the slab. And now we have an exact mirror, both sides. And then when we turn on clipping and smash it together, and then we have one little face in the middle there, which we do not want, so delete that face. Ta-da! Thrilling. Now the final thing. Thing we're going to model, at least in this part, is this second slab, this thing here, right? Which looks like a slab, but it's actually like a cushion, like it's a giant cushion, I assume. I haven't sat on one of these couches, but I assume that is this the same cushion as what's up there. So it's padding. Anyways, point is, we can just duplicate this. So move this up. And you would think that that's what you would do, but actually, it's just this little bit here that sticks out, and then this arm sort of stops there. So actually, this was supposed to go down, and then this part is supposed to end here. Oh, and look at that! I really half-assed the modeling. Okay, there we go. All right, so this part here, now I can select this face. By the way, I'm switching between vertice mode and face select mode by hitting 1 and 3, or you can click these little buttons up here. If you don't have my keyboard shortcut, you should definitely get that. Its link is in the description. You just have to join my newsletter list, and then you get a little PDF with all the shortcuts, and you don't have to worry about, I don't know, anything ever again. Okay, so add a little loop cut there, and then I'll just extrude this little bit out there. I don't want to have to do the same on the other side, so I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Add a mirror modifier, select that object. Got to go into solid view mode. Then we can actually click the right object, which is the cube, and there we go. Actually, the origin was in the right place anyway. Okay, so clipping, smash it together, delete those faces. And there we have it. And actually, if you wanted to be like precise, what you would do is like with this face here selected, if you wanted it to perfectly line up with this face here, rather than going like, oh, is it like perfectly aligned? What you can do, here's a little tip, is if you change, so this snap, this thing here, by default, like it's when you hold down control, it'll move it in like 5 increments or whatever, which isn't handy, but you can change this to face, which means when you hit G and you're moving something, if you then hit X, you're moving it just along the X axis. But then if you hold down control, you can see that it'll snap it to the nearest face, which in this case is this one right here. And you can see that that should now be exactly perfectly aligned. And I'll do the exact same thing here. G, X, hold down control. And now those are perfectly aligned. And then I'll move this back. Shouldn't be coming out the back there. Yeah, that's good. And then I'll just select these two, move this back, hold down control, and there you go. So that should now be perfectly aligned. Now we'll add a bevel and everything later on. That'll come in later parts. But for now, this will be fine. And then the final thing we'll do, at least in this part, is adding in these little steel chrome fancy boy legs. So it's just going to be a cube. So let's just add in a cube, scale this in like so. And it looks like it's rotated at 45 degrees. So yeah, I'll show you a little tip. So let's just take this cube here, drag this out along the x-axis, right? Get the basic shape of it. Right about there. Okay. And it's like a 90 degree, right? So we just drag that, Drag this, extrude this down like so. Cool. Oh, can you see the shortcuts I'm pressing? Okay, you can. Yeah, down there. Sometimes when it's too white, you won't be able to see it, but you'll just have to deal with that. Okay, so we've got a little angle. We could add in a subsurf modifier, whatever, if we wanted to. Actually, I think we'll just use a bevel modifier. It's like the least important thing of this couch. Like if the legs are the only thing that's wrong on your couch, you've done a good job. Trust me. Couches are, yeah, they're finicky. They're hard to get right, but that's why I made this tutorial, because I think I've certainly made enough terrible couches to fill a soup kitchen. I don't know. But anyways, so I want to make a tutorial that shows how to do it well. Anyways, so if I rotate this now by 45 degrees, holding down control, top left-hand corner, minus 45 degrees, that's there. Now, when you do that, of course, you can see that this perspective is now off. Like, it's no longer going to match the blueprint. And then if you were to like come in here and go like, oh, if I take this little piece and I sort of move this out, but then it's like not a flush 45-degree angle. Well, if you followed my little share tutorial, you'd already know this trick. But yes, if you were to move this along like an x-axis, that's X, which is like going this way, right? Which is not what you want. However, if you were to hit G and then X again, it's now moving it local to the rotation of this object, which means that is now, by tapping X twice, I'm now moving this along, and I can get this to line up exactly with the blueprint. And that's still still flush, right? So it's basically when you're tapping G twice, it's like it's using the local transform orientation, or it's basically it's taking this rotation here. So that I hope it's clear, right? It just means that Anyways, it's really handy. I'm glad someone reminded me of the double tap thing when I was doing the chair tutorial, because previous to that I was always like changing this to local and then doing it, and it was too finicky. But thankfully there's a way around that, so that's cool. And then I guess this edge there is probably a little bit higher up, at least according to the blueprint, but that's good. Now, rather than duplicate this and position it, if you could just do this one little thing, could you please mirror modifier right there, and then hit Y as well as X, and you can see it's got it around all the corners. And look at that. We have our couch ready to go. So, of course, save this whilst you can. And then we will move on to the next part, which is finally where we're going to get to the fun stuff, which is making this seat cushion and then using the cloth simulator to make it puff up and have a lot of fun with that. So, welcome to the fun bit of the tutorial. Certainly more fun than the first part where we just did some basic blocky shapes. In this part, we are going to be making the couch cushion. And by that, I mean the backing, right? The bit that you rest your back against, or the seat. It's the same method for the seat. It's essentially making really the hardest part of a couch. It's the biggest, most challenging part. When you see a lot of 3D models online of couches, generally things fall apart here, right? Getting the wrinkles to actually look right. And this is, it's understandable that if you didn't have simulation tools or anything like that, if you were trying to sculpt this by hand, which some sculptors can do well, it's just really, really hard to do that, to sculpt in the wrinkles accurately. And so that's not the method we're going to do, thankfully. We are going to be using two tools in Blender. The first, a cloth simulation to create the basic shape of the cushion. And then the second part, using the new cloth brushes, which is going to add some slight variations to things. So I'll show you that two-step method. And that's something that it took me like far too long to figure out. I've probably made about 50 to 100 of these cushions to prepare for this tutorial, trying all different methods, from multi-resolution to pure sculpting to pure simulation to weight painting. So much mess, and I've figured that this is the best method, the one that I'm going to show you. So to start with, we need the basic shape for the cushion, right? So it's this square shape here. So I'm going to add in a cube, scale this down, position this roughly there. If you can hear my baby in the background, I apologize. But now you got a little taste of my life and what I have to put up with on the day-to-day. Something like really irritating about when a baby just goes, eh. It's just like, spit it out, man. You got something to say it. Don't just, anyways. But you can't say that, because then people think you're a crazy person. But every parent thinks it. So anyways, so I've got this, I've just scaled in the cube. Now you'll notice that I've made this far thinner than the reference appears, right? So the reference has, an inflated looking cushion. And the reason I've done that is that we are going to be using the cloth simulator with inflation. So this is going to expand beyond what it is. So actually this size that you've got here, you really want that to be, if I can find it, maybe this is a better picture. Trouble is it's all like zoomed out then. Yeah, look how tiny that thing is. Let me get in here. Aha. Can you see it? But kind of like where the seams actually are. Like that's where the initial size of the cushion was, and then it's sort of like inflated beyond that. So it's actually really thin, and then the inflation, expands it out. Okay, so the cloth simulator, which is what we're going to use, sculpting is the same. Everything is based off the geometry that you have. So currently we've got exactly 8 vertices that's making up this this shape here. So we would not get anything good out of this. So obviously you need to subdivide it, right? Now, if you were to subdivide this in its current state, and I'll show you this, but just don't follow what I'm doing right now. If we were to just like increase this and create detail, you can see we now have more detail. We have more faces across this mesh. However, the detail is not uniform, right? It's performed the same number of subdivisions across here as it has here. Now, this is a problem whenever you're sculpting, whenever you're doing simulation specifically, because now you have more detail like horizontally on one axis than you do in another. And that is a huge problem, and I see that a lot. I've seen several tutorials actually on YouTube where they start with a mesh that's actually like this, and it's just setting it up for failure because you'll have detail in an area, more in one area, and the simulation won't work right. It'll try and like treat it, I don't know, like more weight for this part, and it just looks horrible. So the first thing you need to do before you do any cloth sim, anything like that, is you want to get square, uniform faces across the entire mesh. So what I mean by that is I find like the shortest face like this, and then I do a loop cut. So Control R and then scroll up on the mouse wheel until looking at this and just sort of judging by your eye what looks like I'm getting faces. So that looks like 14 cuts. And now I'll right click to confirm it in its place. And those now look like faces across there. You can adjust this here if you wanted to after the fact, but that looks pretty good. And now, obviously I need to do the same thing going this way, vertically. So Control R, scroll up, and how does that look? I think that's actually pretty good. Let me test that. 11 is too much. Yeah, that's good. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it to be perfect. So that's good. We now have square faces, basically square faces across it, nice and uniform, and that's good. So now we can get to the cloth simulation phase. Now, we are going to be using a subsurf modifier. So add one in like this. And when you add a subsurf modifier, you can see that it smooths out the corners. We don't actually want that. We want there to be, we want these edges to be sharp. So what you need to do is enable simple instead of Catmull Clark, which means when you change this, you won't see anything happen here. But when we add the simulation, it will actually change it. So let's just set this to 2 and 2, simple, and then go to your simulation panel. Is that the simulation? It's physics properties, and then click on cloth, right? Now, it might have disappeared because I'm on a different frame. If that's the case, just hit Shift left arrow and it'll go back to frame number 1. Now, you got a whole bunch of settings here, but I just want to point out first, the subsurf modifier is above the cloth simulation. That's important because you want it to add the detail and then simulate on top of that. We don't want to apply it. We don't have to apply it. We want to be able to come in here and play with these values if we need to, based on what we're seeing in the simulation. So it's actually really good. It's non-destructive, which is a complicated term, but it just means you can change things after the fact. Anyways, so we got the cloth sim, and if we were to hit spacebar to play the animation, this is what we would see. It's falling, and it's clipping through everything, and that's fine and dandy. Nothing is happening because there's nothing for it to collide into or anything like that. The big value that we want to give it is underneath, is this cloth, physical properties? Here we go. Pressure. Okay. Pressure is what is going to inflate our cushion. And this is really where like 90% of the look comes from. The other 10% is really like the size of these faces. Everything else here is pretty much irrelevant. Tension, shear, bending. Bending actually has some effect. I might tweak that in a little bit, but all these other values, like the default, like I've tried playing with everything and it just like, it made no difference for this, what we are doing here. It's almost all controlled by pressure. So what pressure does is you check the box and then you assign a value. Let's just start with something big. Let's go 10. And what you'll see is that it has started to inflate the object. Now, the way pressure actually works is it's according to each face, right? So we've got faces, it's a closed mesh, so it is evenly like forcing the faces outwards. It's not actually inflating the volume, which is what you'd think. And you can actually see that because if you were to delete let's say one side of your cube, obviously don't do this, but I'm just using it to show you. And then you were to like ramp this up, you would see that it starts to fly in one direction, or at least now it's starting to go in one direction, right? So pressure it's a weird sort of concept. It's not actually inflating it like you would imagine something inflating in the real world. It just appears as if it is when you've got a closed mesh. It's pulling each of the sides in equal sorts of directions, so it looks like it's inflating, even though it actually isn't. So I don't know if that's relevant. Depending on how deep you go into this, it might be. But anyways, so we got pressure, but it is falling. Now, I was against initially like changing these values because I find like a lot of problems, like people do like simulation tutorials and they just disable the gravity. Like they treat it like gravity is not important. Like the real world doesn't have gravity. Like a cushion has gravity, so why wouldn't you want gravity on your mesh? The problem is that this is so hard to control. Pressure with a falling thing that's colliding into something else. It just becomes like jelly and you can't control it. Things start to like pull out and and then you end up like doing weight painting, trying to control which parts have more pressure than others. It was a nightmare. And then I realized like, you just gotta kill it, kill the gravity. And this is what we're going to do. So when you get that, now you just have the pressure. That's it. It's just pressure and it's in space. There's a cushion in space and that's what we're getting, okay? Now, you'll notice that it is heavily deformed, and this is something that I've been banging my head against the wall for most of the last 2 weeks, is that pressure is great, however, it very quickly deforms the original shape into something that you cannot really control. So essentially, the reason this is happening is that this face on the front here is much bigger than these faces here. And so therefore, this part is getting a lot more pressure than these top parts here. And now you can do weight painting and everything like that, but it's really overkill and it doesn't really solve the problem because then you end up with something that doesn't even have proper wrinkles and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, the solution that I've figured out is that you really only need one frame to work, right? And towards the front, in the first few frames, it starts to look like the reference. All right, there we go. Loaded it into PureRef so I don't have to deal with the website. But the reference is, it's got a little bit of push to it. It's a little bit, what's the shape? Not a bean bag. It's a little bit stuffy, but the actual shape itself of the rectangular sort of soft edged thing, it's retaining that, but it has some wrinkles down there. So really, we just need to find a frame at the front here that works. And currently, it looks okay, but there's not nearly enough wrinkles. So the detail of your cushion is really determined by, there's a few values in here that really the biggest one is bending. That can have some sort of impact, but the biggest one of all is just how much geometry you actually have, right? So this is with this amount of geometry, and then when we increase this, by the way, it bases it off of the viewport amount, not the render amount, just for the cloth sim. Anyways, when you do this, you can see it takes a lot longer to simulate, but you get much more wrinkles. And this is actually an interesting point. You would think then that like if you just keep increasing that you would end up with a more and more realistic looking cloth simulator, right? But that's not necessarily true because along with increasing the detail, you're also kind of changing the real world size, right? Like when I simulate at this is too high for the size of this cushion. And the amount of wrinkles that we'll get in this, if I can keep yabbering on whilst it generates, the amount of wrinkles that we'll get on this doesn't make sense for the size of this cushion. It would probably make sense for like, basically, if you go too high on the subsurf, you can end up with a cushion that looks like the real world size would be like the size of a house or a building, right? So yeah, there's going to be more and more detail the larger something is, because cloth can only have so many wrinkles logically depending on the size of it, if that makes sense, right? So too many wrinkles here. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's probably too many wrinkles for the size of this couch. So don't automatically think like, yeah, I'm just gonna let it simulate overnight and then I'll have a hyper real cushion. Like, you don't need to, thankfully. You can just go for something moderate like this, look at the amount of wrinkles that you get, compare it to your reference, and go like, yeah, is that more or less than what I want? And this is definitely fine. Okay, so, we could pause it here. Like we could, freeze it, say this is the frame I want to use, but we can also tweak it a little bit more. So this pressure amount here, I realized pretty late, actually, just yesterday, that the amount of wrinkles that you get here is also determined by how fast it is expanding. Okay, so if you were to set this to 50, what you would find, we do have to wait for it to sort of go, is that you end up with less wrinkles, right? So you can see that like at this point, that's way too deformed for us to use it. And the amount of wrinkles we've gotten is really small, right? So you could see like, this is, maybe even this is probably the size of the cushion that we want in terms of deformation, but there's hardly any wrinkles appearing there. Whereas if you went for a lower amount, so 5, 1/10 of what it was just now, is it will fill it up slower, and you can see it gives it time for wrinkles to appear. So then it like clicked to me. I'm like, aha, that's the key figure then, is like if you want to control for the shape of this, as well as controlling how many wrinkles you get, you need to adjust this pressure amount to fill it up slower or faster, depending on if you want more wrinkles. So if you want more wrinkles, then you would slow it down so that it would fill up slower, right? You end up with more frames before it gets to the size that it needs to, and therefore you end up with more wrinkles. If you've got too many wrinkles, then you increase the pressure size. So you can see like now I've got like this big bend here, and it sort of looks like it's like a loose sort of cushion. So it's like a totally different effect, and yet it's all controlled by this pressure amount here, right? So that's what I mean. Like the pressure is really like the biggest factor here in making a couch cushion. Again, we just need one frame for it to look right. So, thankfully it's at the start of the animation, so you don't have to wait forever for it to sort of come around to the right shape. That looks pretty good to me. Now you could, if you wanted to, by the way, change your bending amount. So I'll just very quickly show you what that is. Depending on the couch you're doing, you might want to adjust this. If we set that to 20, so instead of basically 40 times its default, you'll see you get far less wrinkles, and the wrinkles that you do get is bigger and chunkier. And as well as that, it also retains this edge, right? And that's because, it's bending less, so that 90-degree angle that it starts with, it's trying to retain that and keep it sharp. Now, if you do that, though, if you want that, you don't necessarily have to change this, because along with this, you end up with less wrinkles, right? So it's more suited for something like leather, and it's like, maybe if I want fabric, but I do want there to be an edge. When we get to the cloth sculpting stage next, using the cloth brush, I'll show you a way that we're gonna do some detail around the seams, so you don't necessarily need that. Anyways, let's, don't want this tutorial to be like hours long, so let's set that to 0.5. This is what I'm gonna go with. Let's see how this comes out. All right, that is pretty good. By the way, if you go shade smooth, it can kind of give you a little bit of a look at how it's going to look. With proper shading. Okay, so how big do you want it? How big do you want it? How puffy do you want it looking from the side? Okay, comparing it with the reference. Does that make sense for the type of couch that we're going for? And I think it does. I think that's fine. So when you apply this, you can't go back. Well, you can if you've just done it. You can probably have enough undos to undo the operation. But if you were to get sculpting later on and then go, oh, actually, it would be good if I could recalculate that cloth sim, it's gone. So what I like to do before I apply anything, don't worry about that. That's my watch, just interrupting tutorial. I duplicate it, Shift D, and then I just move it to the side. like so. And then this, I hit M and then move it to a new collection, which I called unapplied. And then it's moved it to its own collection. And then I just uncheck that box, right? So it's hidden. And if I need it, it's there. I can go back to it and recalculate it. Now that I've done that, I hit apply and then apply again on the cloth sim. And that is it. We now have, okay, stop. Go back, Control Z, because we've just done it. There is one more thing, and I'm glad I noticed it. But before you apply it, later on, we are going to be UV unwrapping this guy because we want to apply a texture to it, right? Fabric texture. It is a lot easier to UV unwrap something when you have started with a base mesh like this than it is later on, because it's then going to try and figure out the shape of it and do all this weird stuff. It's a pain. So it's a good idea to UV unwrap it before you apply it. So, okay. We just need to add some UV seams in here, and thankfully this is a couch object where there is logically real seams in real life, so it's very easy to UV unwrap. All we're going to do is go select sharp edges, and that will select all the edges. Oh, and this is in edge select mode, by the way. So hit 2. If you do it in vertice mode, that's wrong. You want to go edge select mode, select sharp edges, then go Control E, and then click mark seam. And that is it. Then we go to the UV image editing tab up here and then hit U unwrap. Okay, and if you see a little alert down there that says like, oh, something's non-uniform, that's because the scale of this is not set to 1. So make sure, I mean, it's the cause of half the problems you have in Blender is when the object has a scale that's not 1, 1, 1. So hit Control A, apply your scale, then hit U unwrap again, and it should then correctly UV unwrap. Okay, now that we've done that, we can apply it, but of course, we have to recalculate the simulation because we've just done some editing. I don't know how Blender decides it. But anyways, thankfully, it doesn't take that long. And that's pretty good. Good. So now we hit apply, and now we have our object here. Ta-da! It's UV unwrapped, it's ready to go, and it looks pretty good. And if you want to see it like, yeah, add another subsurf modifier after it, and you'll like smooth out those shapes, because that's what we're going to do when we render it anyway. And you can see sort of how it looks. It's not too bad, right? It's got the right like smooth deformations. It's got wrinkles where there should logically be wrinkles, and overall it looks pretty nice, but doesn't look that detailed, and that's what the next part is for. So in the next part, we're going to be jumping into sculpt mode and use the new cloth brush, thank you Apple Watch, to add in extra detail, move it around. So a lot of fun. Go ahead, click here, and I will see you in that video. Cloth brushes are an exciting new feature